the whole purpose of the metaverse isn't to give us more interesting ways of buying stuff. It's much deeper than that. People will have jobs that are probably solely in the metaverse. They're solely online, and they'll be in the metaverse because they'll be able to move between different online spaces and have a much richer experience.
There's any number of examples you can bring to make this point, which is about the connectivity that goes with this. The reason why the next generation of consumers spend their time in Roblox and so on is because that's where their friends are. You might be able to charge me £20 if I could put my headset on, and now I'm watching the soccer game, but I'm watching it from inside the stadium. I'd pay more for that. Look around. But if I could put the headset on and I'm watching the game with my friends in the stadium, that's worth way, way more.
Hi, Victoria. Hi, Dave. It is an absolute pleasure having you in the show. Actually, this is like a very exciting podcast because, of course, I've been following you on LinkedIn for a while, but we physically met in Money 2020 Bangkok, and you both had an amazing talk that to me, it was the best of the 3 days. And other people around me, when I was chit-chatting, they were like, yes, that one was amazing. So this is the follow-up. So it's super exciting.
You're very kind, Monica. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say, you were also on an amazing panel as well, weren't you? I think some of the things that you were talking about, co-creation and involving people, really resonated with some of the themes that we discussed in the book as well. So yeah, there's some synergies there, I think.
Yes, it's an overlap somehow. Everything is interconnected these days. Okay, so let's get started. This purpose is all about how we can build purpose-driven fintechs. However, usually I interview mainly founders who are building purpose-driven fintechs. In your case, it is different. We're going to look at the innovation side, right? Like you guys have been pioneering basically Metaverse within the fintech industry. And it's, I think, almost all of us are newbies on this. You guys are the super experts. So the question that I want to start with, maybe with you, Victoria, is why is it important to bring purpose at the center of innovation?
So I think if you don't have purpose, you have a lot of technology and you can forget this human being in it. And one of I think another book that I read by Herman Narula about virtual society, he draws some really good illustrations of why we need to have a very human-centric view of the metaverse, the future of the internet. And I think purpose is what connects people. And I think that links to some of the themes that we unpack in the book is to know that there are people who need identity. So I think purpose makes sure that in the end, we're developing products and we're creating a future that is safe. If it was just about the technology, there would be no accountability for that.
So I think also, Vic, because I interpret purpose probably slightly more deterministically when we're talking about that kind of thing, is people think about the metaverse as this new space for business and all this kind of thing, and it is. But it's also a way to start over again a little bit. Like when we built the internet, to Vic's point, we built it without the identity infrastructure, and we ended up with a place that's full of all sorts of dreadful things and scams and frauds and whatever. And so when you talk about purpose, I hope this doesn't sound too esoteric, but the idea we can start again a little bit with the metaverse and build somewhere which is actually safe and reliable. And I think that does give it a different kind of purpose.
Yes, I like that. So can you expand? As we start entering into the metaverse, how do we actually build purpose-driven fintechs in the context of the future fintechs in the metaverse?
Well, come back to the fintechs in a moment. Let's just talk about the nature of the metaverse itself to begin with. In the proto-metaverses, and Vic has several case studies about this in the book, in the proto-metaverses of today, Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, and so on, we can learn a lot about how the next generation of consumers are going to behave. And I think it's actually funny in a way. Actually, I shouldn't have done this at the presentation I made last week. But if you take the last couple of episodes of American Banker, for example, there's nothing in there about the metaverse. You take the last couple of issues of Vogue, half the articles are about the metaverse, because they're people that are looking at the future. They're looking at brand. They're looking at fashion. They're looking at what the next generation is going to do. So the proto-metaverses are places where we can learn about how those consumers. But those proto-metaverses have problems. If you don't know who people are, if you don't know how old people are in particular, I don't want to be too graphic, but illustrating the obvious points, it's unsafe for some people. And by using the sort of technologies that, remember, we have technologies available to us now that we didn't have when the internet was being put together. So now we have digital identity technology, we have digital asset technologies, we have wallets, we have AI, we have things we can put together to do it a bit differently. Don't you think, Vic, it's like that we can learn from those proto-metaverses, but they're not templates for where we want to go?
I think that's right. And I think one of the things that we uncovered through the process of doing the book is that actually in the proto-metaverses at the moment, there are seeds of failure that are really informative about what you need to do, building out the metaverse. And I think it is probably worth saying, just a little side comment, what are we referring to when we talk about the metaverse? And I think in its simplest terms, it's just the next evolution of the internet. There will be new hardware, there will be new software, there are new communication protocols, and it is evolving already, so that there won't be this big bang moment. It's a space that is evolving, and in today's point, there are brands who have heavily invested in this. With your Apple Vision Pro or your Meta Quest headset, there are much richer experiences, travel experiences, commerce experiences that are a much better way of buying online. And I think it is very clear that the whole purpose of the metaverse isn't to give us more interesting ways of buying stuff. It's much deeper than that. People will have jobs that are probably solely in the metaverse. They're solely online, and they'll be in the metaverse because they'll be able to move between different online spaces and have a much richer experience.
That sounds exciting. AI sounds sometimes scary. It's like the future of AI. We won't have jobs. And now you're saying, hey, in the metaverse, we will have other type of jobs.
But what I think about this, Monica, is that, and there's any number of examples you can bring to make this point, which is about the connectivity that goes with this. The reason why the next generation of consumers spend their time in Roblox and so on is because that's where their friends are. That's where they interact with people. That becomes natural for them to do that interaction. If you translate that into kind of adult things, this is a very simple example. You can charge me £5 to watch the soccer game on television. You might be able to charge me £20 if I could put my headset on, and now I'm watching the soccer game, but I'm watching it from inside the stadium. I'd pay more for that. Look around. But if I could put the headset on and I'm watching the game with my friends in the stadium, that's worth way, way more. So that's about the humanity and the interaction. One of the companies that I work with has just ordered those kinds of headsets for all of their developers, actually, because they found that they found, okay, maybe developers aren't a cross-section of humanity, but they found that they're not robots or anything. Like they're not like the rest of us. But what they discovered was that the meetings were much more productive in the metaverse than in Teams or Zoom because of something to do with presence, something to do with interaction. And also, of course, they want the developers to start visualizing what their next generation products are going to look like in that space as well. So I think it sounds, it's all about technology, but it's about connection and communication and different kinds of that. Now, of course, if I come to talk to a nurse or a dentist or a policeman or a lawyer or someone in the metaverse, I need to know that they're a doctor, a nurse, a dentist, or a policeman, or whatever it might be. So the need for digital identity is absolutely permeates that. But it is about people connecting in most cases. In some cases, I don't care. If I put the glasses on and I'm talking to someone from Commonwealth Bank about why my transfer hasn't gone through, do I really care if it's a person or not? Not clear to me. I don't think so. In fact, I prefer it's not a person, because obviously when I start shouting and swearing at a person, I feel bad for them, because it's not their fault that the bank systems don't work. Like there's horrible people on the airplane shouting at your desk if the plane's late. But if it's a robot, they can take it. I don't mind. And then I feel better. So there's circumstances where you want it to be a person, circumstances where you don't want it to be a person.
Interesting. Victoria, you've mentioned the book a couple of times already. We haven't talked about the book. Tell us more about the book.
So I think the genesis of the book was Dave was working on a project where he was thinking about the metaverse, thinking about the next evolution of the internet, and thinking about payments in that space. And then was involved in a book launch in a recreation of a Siberia cafe. And when it came to pay, he found himself with a very sort of Web 2.0 payment experience. And that set him thinking. So he rang me up and said, do you want to write a paper about this? So we wrote a paper about what we thought payment experiences might look like in the metaverse, what would need to change when you look at the current payment experiences. And through that process, we really then focused in on identity and then wanted to talk more about the other building blocks that are necessary to have a functioning commercial metaverse. So that then led to the book. So that was a sort of 3-stage process. And then I think the purpose, if we have our purpose in read the book, part of the purpose for me was understanding. I think researching and writing and distilling is a great way of creating your own understanding. And then really front of mind, we had in mind business owners. You're a brand or you're in a bank or you're a retailer and you're looking at the next 5 to 10 years, where will your customers be? What sort of behaviors will they have? And how will you be able to meet them there? And I think there are some brands who will build experiences in the metaverse. Some already are. If you think about GenZ, I think it's 56% of them already care more about the way their avatar looks than they do in real life. And then 64% of those are their clothing in, I hesitate to use real life because I think the metaverse is real life, but in the physical world, their physical clothing is influenced by their avatar style. And that's very clear why lots of sports brands and style brands are in the metaverse, because they recognize that's where the creation and co-creation is happening. So I think that was really our intention, to create a playbook or a creative book that looked at the business challenges, looked at some of the proto-metaverses, what can we learn from that, and the building blocks, so that you can be curious and say, okay, this is happening. I love metaverse skeptics because it means that we have to think carefully about what we create. And so what are the building blocks? And to start a conversation about it. I don't know, both maybe have a different perspective, but
one other thing to mention, Vic, is just the mechanics of writing. It was so interesting to me because I've edited some books before. I'd never co-written before. And obviously we know each other well enough that you can do. But there's another sort of fun thing about writing the book, but unexpected actually. But because Victoria's in Sydney and I'm in London, the time difference was very conducive to writing, because Vic would write some stuff at night and then I'd wake up in the morning and there's some interesting new ideas and changes. I do stuff. Vic wakes up in the morning, there's something about that cycle, which I don't know, it worked out very positively in creativity terms. So we only spent probably, in the whole thing, we probably spent a week together around the kitchen table,
Yes,
hammering it out.
right.
But I don't know, I enjoyed the online co-creation. It's going to be even better in the metaverse next time, because obviously in the metaverse, I'll look a little thinner, hair will be a little bit darker.
And it will be younger.
Yeah, we'll look
Yeah.
much younger.
Well-
There's something interesting about the book that was unexpected, was just how creative that process was.
And I think like what's catching my attention is I am not in the metaverse yet. And I can say most of my fintech nerd friends who also hang out in Money 2020 and all those places, they are not there either.
Yeah, but they're what's the word for it? I don't want to, they're old, Monica. This is the
Yeah,
problem.
that's what I wanted to say.
You know,
I'm old.
so let's not beat about the bush.
Old.
Old.
Yes, we're old.
If by the time I just did some work for an insurance company about this, actually, so workshops, which insurance companies I see as very conservative people, but they're thinking, okay, in 5 years' time, we're going to have customers who are going to university. They're going to get their first insurance. They're going to get their car insurance, travel insurance, their flat insurance or whatever. And we want them to get it from us. So how do we make sure that in 5 years' time, those customers come to us? Well, you look at where those customers are now, people think that the customers are mucking about on TikTok. But actually, if you look at the attention span figures, the detailed figures, the proto-metaverse already dominate. So if you want someone to buy insurance from you in 5 years' time, you have to have a plan for how you're going to reach out to them, engage them. And that's where they are now. This isn't some sort of futuristic thing. That's where they are now.
I think it's a really good point there, Monica. We were talking to one of the head of innovation of one of the major banks in Australia, and he said exactly the same as you. Went into the innovation hub and started talking about the metaverse and what's the metaverse. And I think there are two reasons for that. I think the name has, I don't know, maybe someone has to come up with a different name. I think that people who are skeptical about the power that the company Meta has, the fact that they badged it, I think that's given it a bit of bad press. But there is no escaping the fact that not just young people, if you look at something like Roblox, one of their remits at the moment is to grow their user base and across ages. And there are people that have started in Roblox, 15 years ago, and they've stuck with it because that's where their friends are. And so I think those experiences will change. And I look forward to spending time with relatives. Most of my family are either in the US or UK. I look forward to spending time in a space online with them.
A safe space.
In a safe space online. And I think that's bringing back a little to some of the things. What if we don't put some safety mechanisms in place, that the metaverse will be an awful place. That I think there was something on the radio in Australia a couple of weeks ago that said the average age of children who experience online bullying has dropped from 14, 15 to 9. That's shocking. And that's because they're connected with apps. If you imagine that the bully not only is messaging you, but then they're appearing in 3D in your bedroom. So I think those are the things that you have to think about. How do you create that safe space? And as we talk about in the book, there's so much focus on, is this person over 18? Is it alcohol sales? But keeping adults out of children's spaces is equally important.
I think you both touch on a very, very important point, that it's like a safe space. So what is the role of trust in the metaverse?
I think there's two answers to that, Monica. And that's because the word trust has two quite sort of distinct meanings in a way. So when you say trust to me, I'm talking about math. So trust to me, I'm interested in like the mechanical. Does this digital signature check out? Does that credential come from the right person? Is it real? Is this credential being forged or whatever? And also, does the credential come from somebody that I can sue if it's incorrect, broadly speaking? That's a little different from, I think, what people intuitively feel about trust. They don't. So there's two answers to that. So on the one hand, we have to make the infrastructure work mathematically so that you can't put fake credentials into things. You can't put. On the other hand, we have to somehow get people to trust the interactions and the way that they're working there. So there's two answers to that, I think, really.
I think I'm just building on that. In its simplest terms, I think trust is, will you get the experience you're expecting? Like, you go in with a set of expectations. And if we think about the face-to-face environment at the moment, I trust that the bank's going to look after my money. I trust my payments are going to go through. I trust that the bus isn't going to crash. There are all these things that I trust in my daily life. And I think those are the things that we have to think about online. Can I trust I'm talking to that person? And who says they're that person? And to Dave's point, that's where cryptography and digital certificates comes in, because these things should be digitally verifiable. And a lot of, as identities moved and moved from the physical world into the online space, we've digitized, but we haven't made things digitally verifiable. And I think that will be the key difference. And I think one of the other things that Dave and I often talk about is the fact that commerce transactions, they should be more trustworthy in the metaverse than the current internet, because with privacy preserving technology, you will have a much higher level of certainty about who's in the transaction, whether they've got the money, the transfer of goods or assets, because of the bedrock of identity and the security that underpins that.
To build on that, I think digital identities, on top of the metaverse, we also have AI, right? And we have the deep fakes. And that's getting a bit scary, right? We could be having this conversation, but it's not us. It's somebody else pretending to be us, talking about whatever they want to talk about. I think we could assume that the metaverse that I'm using, I'm assuming that it could have some sort of controls in place to ensure that Dave is actual Dave and not somebody else on the other side of the world.
That's absolutely right. And I think we have to make that part of the infrastructure. One of the problems that we have at the moment is that we make it the consumer's problem to try and work out what's real or not. You get a message that says it comes from NAB. There's a problem with your NAB account. You need to phone our fraud team, whatever. It's you who has to try and figure out whether it really came from NAB or not. When I get an email that purports to come, I had a phone call yesterday. Some guy coming out, it's supposedly British Gas, and he wanted to send an energy advisor to presumably case my house for a burglary. I'm like, it's like, why was it me that had to go and look up that number and realize that's not a British Gas number? We want to get an email that purports to come from, I don't know, maybe one of my long lost relatives has run the Spanish lottery. Maybe I'm too cynical. I don't know. I could have passed up an opportunity there. But the point is, it was me that had to look at the email and try and work out whether it's real or not. That's not what's going to happen in the metaverse. In the metaverse, like if we're talking to each other on Zoom, you would expect to see like a red box around someone if you haven't been able to establish their identity. Maybe a yellow box if you know it's a person, not an AI, but you don't know who they are. And maybe a green box if it checks out with the name and the certificate. It's got to be at like that kind of level. We've got to make it part of the warp and weft of the metaverse so that people don't have to do this for themselves. You could easily imagine a situation where avatars, like we meet somewhere and I don't know, maybe my avatar has like a red aura because the system doesn't know who I am or something like that. I'm not imaginative enough to know how designers will really achieve this. But I do know we don't leave it up to the end users. Like we make it part of the metaverse.
I think the other thing that's hard for end users at the moment, if you think about the current internet and also in proto-metaverses, is that I can't authenticate a company. So I go onto a website and there are very successful payment scams that not me, but someone else in my immediate family has fallen foul of, because you think it's that camping shop. And the deal is, seems like a really good deal for tents, but I don't know, maybe it was the end of financial year sale. So you spend a couple of $100 and then of course you don't get the verification email. And then you have that moment and you look and the coloring's a bit off. The reality is that it's very difficult for individuals to assess or confirm the veracity of a company. And one of the things that we think will be simpler in the metaverse because of the ability to digitally verify is it will be seamless for you to confirm that is another person, or that's a robot, an AI, or that's a company. And then I think increasingly the attributes that sit under that as well will be exposed. You might want to know where the avatar was developed. And what one of the interesting discussions, NAB had a really interesting forum around digital identity last week. One of the interesting discussions was about the role that location will play in the future of the internet. So where was this thing either manufactured, or where is the person, and which jurisdictional laws apply? And the sort of sense at the moment is the laws where you're located will apply. And that's that we don't think about that when we're in the metaverse, but we will have to think about that, and we will have to attach the governance layer will have to have some acknowledgement of that.
Yeah. I have a ton of follow-up questions. So let's say for us old people, we currently hang out in social media, right? The youngsters, they are already in the metaverse. If I work in a big bank or a FinTech, in the whichever team, right? Like the product team, operations, like whichever team it is, and we're like, hey, we're going to be in the metaverse. Basic question. I'm assuming, my hypothesis is, I don't go and build a metaverse. I go to, let's say, Roblox, where my customers are, and I build something in there. Therefore, my question is, if that's the case, who's the one responsible for building the features when it comes to digital identity? The platform, e.g. Roblox, or the bank, or both? Well,
I think if it's the platform, then you're not really in the metaverse. If it's the platform, then you're in a virtual world. The big distinction between a virtual world and a metaverse is in the virtual world, things belong to the platform. Your magic sword in the game feels like it belongs to you, but it doesn't really. It belongs to the platform. In the metaverse, things that are yours, they belong to you. And that's a big distinction around that kind of thing. Now, obviously, if you're going to, for example, one of the things I was at recently, there's one of the virtual worlds is called Spatial, and people had built a space in Spatial that you went to join it. So I think some people will build their own metaverses. I wonder actually if it might be sectoral, because I can imagine a situation where, I don't know, currency traders have their own metaverse, which is sort of optimized for what they want to do. And that would be different from the metaverse that the bond traders are in. Maybe in the metaverse for the bond traders, the buildings represent the size of the issue and the spacing of the buildings represents the return. I don't know. Again, we need imaginative, creative people to come in and do this. There'll be lots of different metaverses. They won't be the same thing.
I just wanted to build on what you said and also bring us back a little bit to the question that Monica asked, because the platform is at the bank. And at the risk of sounding like a both and person, it really is both and, because the platforms, if you look at some of the discussion around platforms at the moment and scams in Australia, there's a big focus on some of the social media platforms because the social media platforms profit from scammers on the platform, taking people's money, duping them. So the platform at the moment has no accountability. that has to change. I think the reason they get away with
Totally.
having no
Totally.
accountability at the moment is because it's very hard in those circumstances to know who you're dealing with. So that's where you bring in the banks or the government. So can the banks or the government or your favorite brand issue you with a credential, so a digitally verifiable piece of information that you present to the platform when you want to onboard? So I think identity-like payments is a two-sided market, and so they're both involved. It's a platform play, and also we will need organizations that are prepared to say, yes, that's Monica, and I accept the risk of that being Monica, so that when someone says they're you and something happens, the bank pays out on that. And I remember years ago hearing someone from ABN AMRO actually talk about how they monetize identity. And if you're in this space, there's a lot of discussion from banks about how do we monetize this? And from the bank perspective, they monetized carrying that risk, which is what banks do. They monetize risk. So they had fracking, authentication, and authorization systems. So they had a high level of confidence that the individual was who they claimed to be in the transaction. So they're like, yeah, we'll accept liability for that. And then they, in an event-driven environment, then they keep the information about you updated. So
I think that the business models around this, when you're talking about the identity stuff, I think the business models need to evolve a little bit, because right now we're used to, so for example, Vic said about two-sided markets. In payment cards, we have interchange, we have liability, people know where they stand with these kind of things. We need to move those same concepts into the identity space. So broadly speaking, and I think we can imagine how to do that. And actually people have done it before. We've forgotten about all this, but you remember Identrust, Vic? They had a perfectly good transactional liability. So basically, if I wasn't who I said I was, the bank would be liable for the transactions, but there'd be no contingent liability. And they had a cross reference. There are certainly ways we can do this. We just haven't completely done it yet. But also, I think in the case of the metaverse, because we have so much more infrastructure, like the cost of taking on that risk will be much less because you have a much more secure infra. When you put your Apple glasses on, they do the retina scan to see who you are. It's like that sort of world, it will be, those risks will be much smaller. So it's not banks could never do this. That's not true. Banks have already done the KYC, the AML, CTF, PEP. They just haven't monetized it.
I want to clarify it. What's your view? Could we, not only banks, but like brands, today, in the world that we know it today, each of us, we have an app. You download many apps. So could it be the case where each of the banks and each of the brands build their own metaverse as a new space to shop and hang out, or not really?
I think some of the things from the physical world will play into the online space. And I think we see that with shopping malls, that there's an experience of going to a mall. There's more people, it's where people gather, whereas you tend not to drive out of town to go to a single store in a single place. And if you do, then it's a destination place where it's, specifically reduced and there are lots of different brands within that one store. So I think the social aspects of the metaverse and the connection will mean that brands will probably be less likely to build their own metaverse and will create experiences in other I don't want to say metaverses because it sounds, but we do think the metaverse is a collection of interconnected virtual worlds.
I think it's going to be very brand driven. To go back to some of the case studies that Vic used in the book, the idea of a Nike metaverse or an LVMH metaverse or a Premier League metaverse, those kind of things make sense to me. I think and it's to this point about where you gather and interact with people around that kind of thing. But the point is, who knows? This is why one of the reasons it's fun and interesting is because we don't quite know how that's all going to develop. And certainly I notice when you see people writing up their experience, putting on the Apple glasses, this idea that you have more than one place that you can go to, that is an interesting aspect of this that they haven't really. So the idea that there's going to be different metaverses for different purposes. You and I are not going to use the same metaverse that, I don't know, surgeons use for doing transplant operations and stuff like that. They'll need it for that. They need much higher resolution, response times. That may not be the same metaverse that we go to go and play bridge, just to pick one. No, but that's a good example. Because we're talking about all of these exciting case studies. If you look at what the top selling apps are, like what do people actually want to do in the metaverse now? The one that we weren't really joking about it, which is sad, but is the fitness for the over 50s app. You put the glasses on and you're doing some exercises with your friends, your friends' avatars, which you can tolerate at 6 o'clock in the morning. Things like that, they seem mundane, but actually and you look at, for example, if you look at the top apps for games, things like people playing bridge online and whist online, because people who are perhaps in old folks' homes or they're on their own and they interact and play in that way. It's not all about piloting spaceships and fixing undersea pipelines. A lot of it is about just interacting with your friends in a different way, a more interesting way.
Is that it's that you said at the beginning, it's about human connection.
I think that's what people miss a bit when they're thinking about it.
Interesting. So how will money or how we make payments change?
Of course, this loops back round to the point Vic made earlier on about the genesis of it, which is, I think what we don't want to do is come out of the metaverse to make payments. If you think about what it would be like, you have to take the goggles off, go to a web page, scan a QR code, muck about on your brain. So if things
and it's already not happening like that. They're already stringing sellotape around loan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when I started asking around about this, I was pointed very quickly in the direction of Web3 and tokenization and the idea that you would trade assets in the metaverse without clearing and settlement in other. And that seems quite attractive to me because that's a lower cost way of doing business as well, which will push people in that direction. So the idea that I give you a token, which is some money, and you give me a token, which is a Taylor Swift ticket, which shows up on my phone and gets me into the concert. That kind of thing seems to me to be a much more realistic vision of the future than you give me a barcode to scan and I type something into a web page and then something pops up on my iPhone and so on. So this idea that the digital assets, the fungible money, the non-fungible property will be exchanged inside the metaverse is appealing, not for ideological reasons, but because it's a cheaper way to do business.
Yeah, and probably it's a more convenient experience for customers.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
I think so.
Oh.
And I think what we also think is that will be driven by the digital wallets. Your wallet is your UX wrapped around key pairs. That it has to be some management of the cryptographic keys that are presenting, signing these transactions. And then you have to have some sort of UX, whether that's your web-based wallet or a phone-based wallet. I think that's a really crucial part of the payment. And we're already seeing some development in that space. If you think about what's happening in Europe with the digital identity wallet and all the focus on payments, we're seeing payments and identity come together in wallets. And what the metaverse will do is probably give a richer and more seamless experience. But the technology infrastructure and the layers to that are being put in place now.
Which is a great point. Because if we need to put the layers right now, and you guys do speak with people in financial services across the world, basically, what advice would you give to people in financial services that are like, hey, dudes, you have to start looking at the metaverse. And you need to think about this in a different way. It's not just building another app. It's not just building another feature. You need to think it in a different way. What does that look like?
Wait, do you mean what advice would I give them for free? Because I'm not sure if I understand this.
You could
Not sure if I
confuse
understand
them. That's always
this
a free
line of
advice.
questioning
For
on it.
Dave bucks. What
That's,
advice would you give them for Dave
that's the
bucks?
vision of the future I don't share. Look, I think you can, at a very high level, you can see how companies are already looking at this kind of 3-stage, the sort of now, soon, then kind of thing. And you can imagine this is, I think, quite a general solution. In the first instance, it's about being where the customers are. So it's just about establishing presence and brand in these new environments. When you want to do business with people, you go to where the people are to interact with them. Then you have coming a bit further downstream, you have the kind of more transactional space where not only do you meet the customers there, but you do business with them there. And the example you're using earlier on was insurance. So stage 1 is go to where people are, make sure they understand what insurance is, make sure they associate your brand and so on. Stage 2 is when it comes to the point where they want to buy insurance, be there. No one's going to put a helmet on and go to an imaginary insurance broker's office in the sky. That's never going to happen. These things are experiential. People are booking their holiday with the headset on, and you're standing there ready to provide. Oh, by the way, it'd be useful to have travel insurance for this. It's a different thing. It's part of the experience. So that's transactional. And then the third stage, that when things become integrated downstream, is to create products that mean something in the metaverse. The second stage, you're selling products that exist in the real world, but you're selling them in the metaverse. You go a bit further downstream and you have products that exist in the metaverse. Insurance for digital assets and virtual objects and this kind of thing. I know insurance is a very limited example. So stage 1 is where you interact with people. Stage 2 is where you transact with people. Stage 3 is where you create new products and services for that environment. And I think it's super high level for most organizations. That's a good enough strategy at the moment.
I think there's also something around how the metaverse will be used to reduce certain risks. So if you think about an insurance product, it's there to pay out when something goes wrong. And I think there are lots of things around the metaverse, whether you're using it to train people to do a job. Can you reduce the risk of training people down mines or on oil fields? Can you put them in a very realistic environment, reduce the cost of training them, and then when they go out into the physical environment, you've got a higher level of confidence that they're not going to have an accident. And so for a bank needs to be able to consume that information. Like, how do you put that into the insurance products you're building? There will be new information that the banks will get that they need to add to the way that they're thinking about these products. And in some forms of insurance might go all together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of disruption around it that may come too.
This is a fascinating conversation and topic. So as we approach the end, what excites you about the metaverse?
For me personally, I'm very interested in the experiential stuff. So I'm interested in you go to events with your friends, go to concerts, go to sports events. The thing about, because like Vic, you have friends and family that are all over the world. The ability to be in these sort of shared spaces, I think, is really very exciting. But very specifically, I'm excited about the fact that Manchester City are the first ever pioneers. Remember, they were the first team in England to have contactless ticketing at their stadium. They're now the first team to have a mini metaverse. You can go inside the Manchester City metaverse, which is what I'll be doing right after this conversation, actually. So that's what I'm excited about at the moment.
Yes, that sounds very exciting. I want to join you. Exactly, like you say, I want to pay more to be in there.
Exactly.
With my friends. That's cool. And you, Victoria?
I think for me, it's the unknown. If we think about what happened to whole lines of business because of the internet, and that easy thing about Amazon, they started selling books and they sold other things, and then they disrupted the film industry. They're creating movies and on demands, and no one knew that. I remember buying my first book online. and we didn't see the knock-on effect, the impact of it. So I'm excited about that because I think Dave said earlier, we don't know. There's things that will happen where someone in 20 years' time will look back and say, oh, yeah, remember you had to put on those CE headsets. I think we won't have those headsets. Everything will be a lot more integrated in. And that, I'm really interested in that because of the connection back to that human and back to that purpose. I think in a world of AI and automation, there's an opportunity to create better connection between people. Yeah, so that's what I'm excited about.
So we should do our next podcast in the Metaverse.
Absolutely, we should.
100%, yeah.
So as we go towards the really end of the episode, this is one of my favorite questions for everyone. If there was one thing, but only one thing that you could change in the industry that make the lives of customers, staff, and shareholders better, what could that be?
One thing in the finance industry?
Yeah. I think it's easy for me. Dave thinks about it. I'm going to say it is that mutual authentication. Like, how do I know that's that company? How do I know that's that person? Fraud and scams is the single biggest problem that banks are dealing with at the moment. And it's a whole industry. The scammers, they've got HR departments and car parks. And so I think that addressing that, and you address that with identity.
That's a really good shout, Vic. Absolutely. Yeah. No, what I was thinking was, I wish they would ban, like when you call up the bank or the airline or the phone company, you get a recorded message saying, you can use our website to book. And I'm like, what? There's a website? I never even knew that. It's literally the last resort. The last thing I want to do on earth is to actually phone the airline. And the first thing, if I could have done it on your stupid website, I would have done it. I wouldn't be ringing you. And it's very insulting when they play those. So I want to ban those. That would be my contribution.
I think that's a good one. That's a good one. Both of them are really good. But I think everyone can relate to Dave's pain.
Yes. Yeah, and hopefully fewer people can relate to the scams pain, but
exactly.
Yeah, it's a growing problem.
Exactly. So cool. It's been an absolutely amazing conversation. Thank you both.
It's
everyone.
A pleasure talking to you, Monica.
That's good fun. Good way to end the week. Thank you, Monica.
See you again soon.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Ciao, ciao, everyone.